Welcome to Never Again Is Now, a podcast about anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism in the United States is at an all-time high. The White House, therefore, recently launched a national strategy to counter it, the first national strategy against anti-Semitism in the history of the United States. We discuss this today with an established journalist from the Jewish press. I'm Evelyn Marcus, and in addition to being a psychologist, I'm featured in the documentary about anti-Semitism, Never Again Is Now. I am a Dutch Jew and a daughter of Holocaust survivors. In 2006, I emigrated to the United States because of the rising anti-Semitism in Europe.
I am Phyllis Zimbler-Miller. I'm the founder of the free nonfiction Holocaust Theater Project, thinedgeofthewedge.com. I grew up in Elgin, Illinois, a small town outside Chicago, which was not a Holocaust community. And yet, in September 1970, only 25 years after the end of World War II and the Holocaust, my U.S. Army officer husband and I were stationed in Munich, Germany, and this changed our lives as Jews forever.
Ron Kompias is an award-winning journalist and currently the Washington bureau chief of the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, which serves Jewish community newspapers and media around the world. Ron worked previously at the Associated Press and at the Jerusalem Post, and as a journalist, he was based in many places in the world. Ron, it's great to have you on our show. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Let's start with a basic question, which is, how do you relate personally to anti-Semitism?
Well, I mean, I think, I grew up in Montreal. I was exposed to a little bit in school because I grew up in there are a lot of Jewish neighborhoods in Montreal that were then, but I grew up in one that wasn't really so Jewish. And I faced the traditional Christian Protestant, Christian Catholic type of anti-Semitism, but nothing too serious. And now I relate to it professionally. I mean, it's something I write about right now. I'm in Pittsburgh. I'm covering the trial of the gunman accused of killing 11 people in a synagogue here, in the Tree of Life synagogue in 2018. And so there's, as a reporter, you always have to try at least to maintain a kind of a professional distance. And so it's interesting. I mean, like I wrote an essay after the attack in Charlottesville in 2017 by neo-Nazis. And I wrote about how I was repeatedly confronted with sort of anti-Semitic remarks and epithets because for some reason people could tell I was Jewish, at least not the Nazis or the people who were marching could tell I was Jewish. And I just remember, like, the first thing that was triggered was like, well, this is curious. Why do they think I'm Jewish? What are they talking about? How does this relate to why they're here? In other words, I didn't take it personally. I wasn't afraid. I was just interested. So, I mean, and that's just something you build up as a journalist, I think, over the years, not just in terms of hostility towards Jews, which one I encounter, but hostility towards Americans. If you're in a place that that is hostile towards America, or hostility towards journalists, which unfortunately is something that happens a lot more now, but you don't take it personally that they're being hostile towards you as a journalist. You factor it into the story.
Thank you.
Ron, the national strategy of the White House, and that was made together with the various Jewish organizations and representatives of the Jewish community in America. That national strategy of the United States consists of 4 pillars. One is education about anti-Semitism and about the Jewish American heritage, education of that in schools and elsewhere. The second pillar is increased security measures at Jewish buildings. The third pillar is to reverse the normalization of anti-Semitism online and offline. And the fourth pillar is building an inter-community solidarity and action against hate. Are there certain measures within those pillars that you think are remarkable?
I don't know if remarkable is the word, but I would say certainly innovative. I think that what was was interesting, at least, Nina, now it's almost like it's become part of the conversation, but what was interesting in May when this was revealed, and it was revealed how we had an idea, journalists said that is a few days beforehand, about what it was going to look like, is how comprehensive it is, how they see as anti-Semitism, not the government, the Biden administration sees anti-Semitism not just merely as combating bias against Jews, but as creating a more holistic environment in which Jews can feel comfortable. And I just, like, for instance, like I remember getting an invitation to the a Department of Commerce, sorry, I think it was a Department of Agriculture event on for Jewish American Heritage Month. And normally I would have even been surprised to find out, I know that there have been obviously Jews involved in agriculture, but why are they emphasizing it at the Department of Agriculture? But it wasn't just that. They were thinking of it at the time, and they didn't in the end, but they were thinking of it at the time, talking what they were going to do for the anti-Semitism leg of it. So I just asked around in the administration, what is the Department of Agriculture going to do about anti-Semitism? And they said, well, just, making food distribution to the poor, making it more kosher friendly, making Jews feel more comfortable, making sure that there's kosher food available for the poor is something that the Department of Agriculture is responsible for. So I think that's the holistic aspect of this rollout was what was made it remarkable, I guess, in a sense.
You also wrote about the importance of holding online platforms, social media platforms, responsible for hosting anti-Semitic speech on online, on social media. Is that correct?
Yes, this is part of one of the things about this platform is that every government, every administration program, they try to make it they try to add things into their initiatives that reflect programs that are underway or initiatives that are underway. And the Biden administration is very much about trying to make social media platforms more responsible for controlling misinformation or for controlling bias. It was actually, coincidentally, not having anything to do with this, dealt a blow by a federal judge's ruling last week that departments of government may not be in touch on a vast range of issues with social media companies. And that's, the government's going to challenge that. We'll see where that goes. But certainly, yes, they want to, one of the legs of their ambitions with social media is to reduce the possibility of incitement towards violence. Here in Pittsburgh, that's playing a factor. It's a factor in in what's going on here. The gunman was radicalized online. He was radical, and not just online. He was radicalized in a social media site, Gab, that was established in part because its founder, who's an acknowledged anti-Semite, was frustrated by the limits that Twitter, before it was owned by Elon Musk, was putting on hate speech, on far right rhetoric. And so, yeah, that's definitely part of the initiative here to try and that's why I think that that's one element of the strategy that's controversial, because social media's companies, while they're happy to consult with the government on combating disinformation, they don't want any legislation. They don't want any enforcement for First Amendment issues, for business issues. They're resisting that.
So it's not clear yet whether the social media platforms will actually will restrict the speech on their platforms, the anti-Semitic speech. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think this is just an ongoing conversation. There is, it's a pendulum right before, after what happened here in Pittsburgh in 2018, there was definitely a swing towards more controls ahead after the January 6th riots in Washington, right before President Biden's inauguration. There was definitely after and before, but especially after, there was a trend towards controlling misinformation. Now there's a swing away with it, as you're getting especially conservatives who perceive this as going too far, as shutting them down. And you're getting, Elon Musk removed a lot of the protections that were on Twitter, and you're getting Republicans. Part of the reason this federal judge blocked the federal government from communicating with platforms is because there were the complaints brought by two states attorney generals from the South, both Republicans, who are saying that the government is overly involved in moderating social media. So it goes back and forth. So yeah, I'm not sure exactly how even the government can communicate this now, given the injunction, the federal injunction.
Before we talk about the definition of anti-Semitism that was included in this broad program, could you just give us a little bit of background about how this happened? Yes, anti-Semitism is incredibly on the rise here and around the world, but why now? Why did the government, the White House, decide to actually come out with this policy?
I think, well, first of all, I mean, it's just been it's an interesting evolution, actually, because Biden in his first speech announcing that he was going to run in 2019. If you look at that ad, it's not a speech; it's more like an ad. You see the people marching in Charlottesville, and he says, and I don't think there's any reason to doubt him, because it's such a sui generis way to announce a presidential run. He says that he was like, he'd been thinking about running in 2016, and then his son Bo died, and he decided that was it. He was retiring from politics. I think Jill Biden, his wife, was also exhausted from politics, and then he saw the 2017 march in Charlottesville, and he saw President Trump equivocating about condemning. He did condemn the neo-Nazis, and then he kind of didn't condemn them. He kept on going back and forth. And I think Biden was just moved by seeing the neo-Nazis, seeing what he thought was Trump's failed response to respond to the neo-Nazis. And that moved him to run. And so that became like a critical part of, you campaign, and then you want to implement some of your campaign promises. I think it's a natural tendency for anybody. Same thing happened with Trump in 2017. And then so it became essential to his mission, but he had a more broad view of, or at least his administration did, of bias. And so in, I think, September of last year, there was a summit against hate or something like that at the White House. And it was, it was fairly ecumenical. They talked about all the different types of hatreds that are out there. And I think that one of the things that made Jewish groups uncomfortable was that it's, when you do that, it dilutes to a certain extent the focus, because every type of hatred is different. It has different sources, and they have a lot of common sources as well. And in some ways, it makes sense to coalesce, but in some cases, you don't want to be ignored. And so, one thing that wasn't addressed at that summit of hate so much was anti-Semitic violence or attacks or hatred that comes not from the far right wing. That was like that's what was focused, and it was kind of like anomalous, because one of the guests, one of the stars of that event was Charlie Citron, the rabbi who had held at bay, or had managed to get away for his congregants in Texas, in Colleyville, Texas, and that perpetrator was somebody who'd been radicalized through militant Islam, which is neither right nor left, but it's not right wing. And here you are at a conference, it's like focusing almost exclusively on the right. And another person was Joseph Borgen, who had been attacked by pro-Palestinian activists and knocked unconscious almost by pro-Palestinian activists. Again, that's not coming from the right. And so there was a sense, I think, and there was Jewish organizational pushback against the White House, saying you've got to be more focused. And so in December, the Jewish second gentleman, Douglas Emhoff, convened a round table. It was interesting about that round table. It was much broader. You had visibly Orthodox Jews, like representing organizations like Agudat Israel and Orthodox Union, talking about attacks on Jews in the Northeast that weren't necessarily coming from the right. They weren't coming from the left. They were just coming. And so you're talking about why those things were happening. You had Julia Jassy, a young woman who's started a campus group, I think it's called Israel on Campus, to talk about that focuses on anti-Semitic bias, not just from like Israel related, but a lot of it is Israel related, which the Biden administration hadn't dealt with. And she was there and she was talking about this. So they had the task force. They had like what was interesting. I really thought, and like they allowed media in for the very first half hour or so of that roundtable, and then they had it by themselves. And I talked to people inside, and I saw it myself. It's like Susan Rice was there, other top government officials were there, and they weren't talking. They were like really taking notes, like really scribbling, one guy on his laptop. And so they were taking it seriously, I think. And so that's what this is a culmination of, is like a more holistic, a broader way of dealing with anti-Semitism than just saying it's coming from the far right. And by dealing with the far right, we're going to deal with anti-Semitism. That's not necessarily going to happen. And I think that this is a kind of realization of that.
So it's anti-Semitism in its full spectrum that is taken into account in this strategy, you're saying.
Yeah. Or like at least tried to. I mean, there've been some criticisms of it, but yes, that is definitely the aim.
I was going to ask you to say that again to make sure our listeners, that if we were able to take it to erase the far right, it still wouldn't solve the problem. I think that's really important that we on Evelyn and I try, and with our different guests, to share with our listeners. So let's talk about the definition of anti-Semitism that was included in the policy or not included. Different Jewish organizations, among themselves or publicly push for one definition or another. So let's talk about that definition.
Right. So they I have it in front of me. Well, first of all, they had their own definition. They wrote their own definition before getting to the outside definitions. Anti-Semitism is a stereotypical and negative perception of Jews, which may be expressed as hatred of Jews. It is prejudice, bias, hostility, discrimination, or violence against Jews for being Jews or Jewish institutions or property for being Jewish or perceived as Jewish. Anti-Semitism can manifest as a form of racial, religious, national origin, and or ethnic discrimination, bias, or hatred, or a combination thereof. However, anti-Semitism is not simply a form of prejudice or hate, is also a pernicious conspiracy theory that often features myths about Jewish power and control. And then it goes into the outside definitions, and it talks about the most prominent is a non-legally binding working definition of anti-Semitism adopted in 2016 by the 31 member states of the International Holocaust Remembrance Association, which the United States has embraced. In other words, they're not saying this is our definition, but they've embraced the definition. And the reason that's important is because the so-called IRA, that's the acronym is IRA, definition outlines 6 of 11 possible expressions of anti-Semitism, outlines 11 possible expressions of anti-Semitism, and 6 of them have to do with anti-Israel bias. It doesn't say that every form of criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic, but it says that these 6 are. And then it says, in addition, the administration welcomes and appreciates the Nexus document, which is something that came out a couple of years ago, and there's a whole, evolution of that and why that happened. But what the Nexus document essentially does is, IRA was conceived like it's based on stuff that the American Jewish Committee was doing in the 2000s, and like a decade and a half ago, to advise the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, of which the United States is a member, on how best to identify anti-Semitism. And it wasn't supposed to be legally binding. It was just to give ideas of how there is anti-Semitism, and often, especially in Europe, that anti-Semitism can be expressed through a veneer of anti-Israel activism. And so it's the authors of Nexus thought that was vague, that there was too much room in there. And that kind of coincided with a criticism from the left that the IRA is used as a bludgeon against people who criticize Israel. But I'm one of the authors of the Nexus definition is David Schraub. He's an academic in Seattle and Washington State. And I don't think that was his motive so much, to sort of limit where anti-Semitism is in Israel intersect. It was more trying to make it more specific. And so he came up with the Nexus document to sort of try and fill in the gaps that the IRA document left. So that was, and there are people in the administration or who are close to the administration who helped to draft the Nexus document. So naturally it was going to be part of their, there were people on this task force who helped draft. I think one of them at least is Matt Nosanchik, who had been a Jewish liaison for the Obama administration, has gone on to other sort of Jewish organizational stuff. So he was one of the drafters both of the Nexus. So that's where it came in. And there are organizations, what's interesting, I think, is that most of the organizations from left to center right accepted this definition. The left was satisfied because
Which definition?
The definition as it's outlined here. In other words, they embrace IRA, they note and welcome Nexus, and they note other efforts. The left was satisfied because it's not tied permanently to IRA. It's embracing it, but not and saying it's not the only definition, which is what they wanted. The right is satisfied, the center and the right are satisfied because IRA is in there. It's they embrace IRA. But there are critics who say that they should have exclusively embraced IRA, but by not embracing, and they come mostly from the right wing, these critics, by not exclusively embracing IRA, they're saying they're being too flexible, and it's going to allow in anti-Semitism under the guise of anti-Israel criticism, and that it's just not tight enough. So there's a kind of dissatisfaction with that. And, a lot of the coverage of this had to do with that. If you'll notice, my story didn't cover that because I thought the innovation here was really that there's a comprehensive strategy to counter anti-Semitism. You're talking about 2 paragraphs. That's not going to be my obsession. That's not going to be my story. Right. I'm going to include it. I talked about it, but I'm not going to. I wasn't going to make it the whole story because I don't think it is the whole story.
At least there was enough unity in the Jewish community to get to a national strategy together with the government.
Yes, yeah.
Right. And then, of course, it's not ideal to all the participants in that.
Right. We're talking about Jews.
Yes, that's what I was just thinking. But right. Does Nexus stand for something, or is it just a name they came up with?
I think it's just a name they came up with. I mean, what I was going to say is that I think the political evolution of there's something called the Jerusalem document that came out that was at this almost the same time, that was anti-IRA. It was conceived to be against IRA because of the way IRA talked about anti-Israel sentiments. And so people knew that was coming out. And I think the Nexus people, I know the Nexus people, one reason they got their definition out literally a week before the Jerusalem Declaration came out, because they wanted to neutralize it to a degree. They wanted to say, hey, here's a way we can all agree on Israel without saying IRA is bad. And so that was part of the genesis of Nexus. And so it was definitely, academics like David who are on the center left, but who also have a very, have a commitment to the idea that certainly that you can express anti-Semitism under the guise of in certain cases, under the guise of anti-Israel
and that's
sentiment.
Very important. That's very important.
Right.
So, Ron, the Council of American Islamic Relations is one of the inter-community partners mentioned in the plan. You wrote,
right.
You wrote, because this organization has always had harsh criticism on Israel. It is also known that a U.S. District Court judge found there was ample evidence that CARE, which is the abbreviation for Council of American Islamic Relations, was associated with Hamas.
Right.
On whose initiative did CARE become a partner in our national strategy against anti-Semitism? And what will CARE's role be?
It's interesting. They're not mentioned in this document. They're mentioned in other literature that came around the document. But yeah, they're part of the strategy. My best guess is how it came about. First of all, CARE is kind of like they've been emphatic for the last 15 years that any association they had with Hamas in the late 80s, early 90s is long behind them. And so that's, I don't know to what degree one wants to take that into account, but that's what they say. I think the more current problem with them is how their criticism of Israel, how harsh it is, how negating it is of the Jewish character of Israel. And I think that's what upsets a lot of Jewish organizations now. On the other hand, they've managed to position themselves, and just like within the Jewish community, I think there are a lot of Jews who are not happy with the organizations that claim to speak for the Jews. There are a lot of Muslims who are not happy that CARE speaks for Muslims, but for a whole variety of reasons. But they've managed to position themselves, because they have chapters in every state, as a credible voice for Muslim Americans. And so one of the thing that this document, the White House document, reiterates is a commitment to bringing funding for securing nonprofit institutions up to $360 million. And this funding started, I remember when it started in 2005, because there had been an increase in attacks on Jewish institutions. And it was that was never designated solely for Jewish institutions, but it was originally $15 million in 2005. And Jewish institutions, the Jewish organizations that had lobbied it for it, were most adept at getting the funds because they understood it. They're the ones who'd actually written, more or less, written legislation. It was the Agudat Israel, Orthodox Union, and Jewish Federations of North America. And one thing, as hate crimes started to rise, and as they started to target not just Jewish institutions, but Muslim institutions, mosques, and Black churches. In 2015, you had the attack on the Mother Emanuel Church in South Carolina. What was interesting is that you had these non-Jewish institutions coming to Jewish institutions and saying, how do we apply for these grants? Because we need these grants as well. And you had the Jewish institutions lobbying for the increase in funds. And now it's going to be at $360 million, in part because of the vulnerability of these institutions. And so I think CARE comes into it, not because they're going to be advocating for anything on the Jewish side, but because of the holistic need to secure, because that's exactly where they're mentioned. They're mentioned in terms of getting the money. And like there's a specific issue with Muslim institutions. I attended once a seminar that included representatives from Jewish organizations, from Muslim organizations, and from Black Christian organizations at the FBI headquarters on how to protect oneself. And so like the Jewish organizations, and this has become like, it's become Bible for the Jewish organizations. There's a guy, Michael Masters, who has this security community network. And he said, like, one of the things he said is that contact your local police and coordinate with them. Make sure you know who to call, make sure they know you. Just meet with them and do all those things that are good, because when you have an attack on your institution, it's just going to make things much quicker. It's going to get the first responders out there quicker. They're going to be able to train you on how to defend an attack. And that's important because, if you look here at the Tree of Life Synagogue, there was training that actually prevented greater casualties. And then I remember, like, a couple of the Muslim spokesmen, I don't think they were from CARE, they were from other groups. I said, well, that's a really hard sell in our communities. We don't trust the police because they after 9/11, they came and they monitored us and they looked at us, and there's just not a lot of trust between Muslim communities and the police. So I think that what the government is made me doing here is getting CARE, which is actually one of the groups that's more identified with antagonism towards the government, to go into Muslim communities and say, yes, we do have to cooperate to a degree with the police if we're going to be protected. So I think that's where it comes from. And it's just bringing, like, there's been criticism also because they do talk about Islamophobia and other types of bigotry. And like, why aren't we just focusing on anti-Semitism? I think, well, from what I heard from somebody who's inside the administration, is that it's a typical, what looks bad from one side can look good from the other side. So from within the government, it's like, why would we spend money like doing this in silos when we can just do this coordination all together, at least in terms of securing religious institutions? And so that's where they're coming from. On the other hand, it is, like I said, it's like, this is a group that issues like wildly, if it's not anti-Semitic, it's wildly one-sided assessments of what just went on in Jenin in the West Bank in terms of Israel's raids there, which Israel sees as necessary to protect. When Israel has suffered terrorist attacks over the last year, and Israel sees it, and and then CARE just uses the most biased, obscurantist language to describe those attacks. And so, of course, it's a weird thing to be in the same boat as CARE. But what's interesting is that it's happened sometimes. It's like Ilhan Omar. I don't think she's affiliated with CARE, but of course she's like
she is.
Yeah, she is. Okay, so she's a Muslim American congresswoman who's provoked a lot of controversy because her views on Israel and backing the boycott. But one of the first things she did was lead a successful effort to get a rule change done on religious wear in Congress, who is working with her behind the scenes on that? Agudat Israel. It's like, it's not that unusual that these people have such, and then it's a Supreme Court decision just now on a, that had actually wall-to-wall support left to right, not just in the Jewish community, in the broader community, that allowed a U.S. postal worker to take off a Christian Sabbath because he was an evangelical, and so Neil Gorsuch, I think it was, in writing one of the concurrences on that opinion, which, like I said, was welcomed across the board, he cited the Orthodox Union amicus brief in one case about why this would be a great decision for Orthodox Jews because they need more flexibility for the workplace. And then he cited CARE amicus brief in the other case. So it's like, sometimes in America, you're going to get strange bedfellows, as we know. And I think that explains a lot of it.
Yeah, I was wondering because, as you heard in my introduction, I'm from Europe, and we've seen radical Muslims apologize for saying I'm no longer radical, and then they got important positions in city council advising of anti-radicalization. And later on, it turned out they had not really stepped away from radicalism. So, it's really, I find it's a risk to have CARE look into your security measures, etc. Because
I understand. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I was wondering whose initiative this was, but it's the initiative of the government, from what I understand.
Yeah.
Okay.
All
right.
As we're coming close to the end, I think we'll give you your last thoughts. I do think I'd like to know your opinion. Is this going to make a difference? I mean, it's really nice. There's money behind it, but is anyone really going to do anything?
I think, I think it's already making a difference to an extent. I think that, yes, like if you looked at the groups across the board, how welcoming they were of it, just in terms of creating a more, Jewish friendly atmosphere within the government. And the federal government is a vast instrument, and the people it affects are a vast instrument. And if you're getting more people to think in terms of what is anti-Semitism, what is a good way to just integrate Jews and to make them feel comfortable, then it makes that difference. Government is it's a bully pulpit to a degree. Even if you don't see the results of the practical results of some things for years, you do have the rhetoric, and so to that degree, I think it does and will make a difference. I mean, to a degree that it makes a difference in stemming it, even with that awareness, and as wonderful as that awareness is, it's very satisfying, I think, when you encounter a group of students who know what the Holocaust is and have a sensitive understanding of it. Does it actually stop that minority of students who are going to be anti-Semitic anyway? I don't know. I don't know if do you get actual reductions in anti-Semitic behavior? I don't know if that ever happens. However much education you put out there, I think the education is good. It's important to have out there. I don't know if it has an effect on actual making Jews more secure. What does have an effect on making Jews more secure, I think, is definitely the nonprofit security grants program, which is, like I said, they mentioned they're going to advocate. It was a pre-existing number, but they're going to advocate for the $360 million go towards the program.
But not only to Jewish buildings, right?
Not only to Jewish institutions, but because, like I said, those organizations have begun to realize that they need security as well, and the Jewish organizations, like I said, are training them in how to apply for these grants because they want the money out there as well. I mean, part of this is saying, we need this more for Jewish organizations, and we need this for everybody.
Evelyn, do you have a last question? Otherwise, I'm going to ask Ron for his last thoughts.
I was wondering, in addition to Phyllis' last question, what, for instance, will Jewish students notice from this? What kind of effect will they experience from this strategy, you think? They're on campus of high school or college, and a lot of aggressive anti-Zionist propaganda is coming towards them and their peers, which is sometimes generalized towards an aggressive approach to Jews, towards Jews in general. What do you think they will experience as an effect from this strategy?
Again, I think it's like the bully pulpit. I think that if you have a federal government that says that that there's certain that bullying a Hillel, for instance, because they had like one lecture last year that featured an Israeli speaker or something, and then sort of excluding the Hillel, keeping it out of campus life, getting other sort of campus organizations voting not to work with the Hillel or with other Jewish groups. And if you have like a government that says that's unacceptable, it makes it easier to sell on the campus. That it's unacceptable to a degree. What that happens over the next year or next 5 years, we'll see. But now that has become a government policy, and it had been to a degree a government policy, and now it's a bipartisan government policy because Trump included it in an executive order, I think, in 2019, and now it's been consolidated into this. Those ideas have been consolidated into this strategy. In fact, I mean, Trump's executive order itself was based on a Obama administration Department of Education order from 2012, I think. So it's just a further consolidation of the bully pulpit.
And if we want to, and our audience want to follow the status of the implementation of this important plan, where can they best follow this in what publication?
JTA.org. We're actually supposed to convene like a staff meeting on like how we're going to cover this, but everybody's on vacation because it's July. So we're going to get around to it soon. We're going to try and figure out the way to figure out like how the Jewish organizations are involved, what's being rolled out, what's happening, what's not happening, and try and get those stories out.
Wonderful.
So,
Felix.
Yes, last thoughts.
Last thoughts is that I think we all have to live our lives and not be afraid to live our lives and go out. I mean, I think that's been like one of the most important strategies that the Jewish community security organizations have had. They don't want this. They don't want the United States to become Europe. They don't want, I just remember like a few years ago, I was in Yanina in Greece, and there's a Romaniot community there, and I might have Romaniot in me, and it's just such a wonderful thing to read about them, like this ancient Greek Jewish community. And I went up to the synagogue and like just locks and chains everywhere. You couldn't knock on a door, and that you don't want that in the United States. On the other hand, we have to, that has to coincide with an awareness of, one of the things that's been coming out of this trial here in Pittsburgh, as in a story I just wrote yesterday that we have up today, is that the gunman didn't operate in a vacuum. He was radicalized, and he was radicalized by an existing community out there that adheres to a very, not just a white supremacism and anti-Semitism, but a very American brand and stream of white supremacism in America and anti-Semitism. As wonderful as this country is, as great as its ideals are, it does have those ideas also embedded in its fabric, and to be aware of those. Like, one of my thoughts when I was doing this the other week, I was here in Pittsburgh, is just walking up the street past a Lutheran church that said all welcome, just walk in and worship. You can't have that in a synagogue in the United States. There is no such thing. You have to make an appointment. You have to know, they have to know you at least. That's a difference that's absolutely true for Jews, I think, to a degree, possibly for Muslims, and now for Black churches. And I think that just to be aware of that and those limitations, we need to, that'll inform how we go forward.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you so much for taking your time to share with our audience your really important insights. I thank our listeners for listening. Those of you who have not yet seen Evelyn's documentary, Never Again Is Now, you can see it on Amazon and YouTube. Very important, because what happens in Europe frequently comes here, which it is, and we need to be aware. And more information on my place, Thin Edge the Wedge, is at thinedgethewedge.com. And as we end every show, we say, without putting yourself in physical harm, please speak up against anti-Semitism and all hate.